Now let's spend a little bit of time just looking at the new forms and evaluating how to complete them and showing you some examples. This is the biographical and conflict of interest form. Again, remember that all CNE activity planners and presenters complete this form, the very same form. In addition to that, they need to be very clear on what their role in the educational activity is. Are they the chair of the planning committee? Are they a planning committee member? Are they faculty, presenters, authors, or others? Note that at least one member of the planning committee has to have a baccalaureate degree or higher. Please note on this form that if you are up on the planning committee and you are a presenter, you would need to check both boxes. If you are the planning committee chair, you need to indicate that as well. On this form, you'll see in the presenter case that the presenters must check both boxes. This is one of the things that we're going to have to watch out for. It does say check all that apply, but as we know, that can sometimes get missed when people read it. In the expertise section for the planning committee, and remember, all presenters and planning are part of the planning committee activities, they must indicate on this how they are, what their specific expertise is. So both planners and presenters need to complete this section. And in this section, you could add any additional information that gives them the qualifications to be a continuing nursing education planner, for example, the professor of a university. In Section 3, they need to clearly show us why they are the content experts. That's why they are on the planning committee. They are the content experts and will be able to really enhance the program. So there's a field where they can type in what their experiences are, their honors, awards, professional publications, etc. If you recall from the previous form in 2012, there was a great amount of data collected about where they went to school, what their educational background was. We are no longer collecting that, but we instead want them to enhance their expertise section. The final section of the biographical and conflict of interest form obviously focuses on conflict of interest. And in order to clearly understand conflict of interest, I think we need to look at the definition from ANCC. Conflict of interest is an affiliation or relationship with a commercial interest organization of a financial nature that might bias a person's ability to objectively participate in the planning, implementation, or review of a learning activity. And we discussed on a slide earlier what commercial interest is. On the conflict of interest form, there's a very good definition and explanation of conflict of interest, and it's in our interest today to just go over the first paragraph of that. Each individual who is in a position to control the content of a continuing education activity must disclose all relevant relationships with any entity in a position to benefit financially, and that's the key piece. There's a financial benefit there from the success of the educational activity. Examples of relevant relationships include, but aren't limited to, those relationships in which the individual benefits by receiving a salary, royalty, intellectual property rights, consulting fee, honoraria, ownership interests such as stocks or stock options or other ownership interests, but it does not include diversified mutual funds or other financial benefit. ANCC wants to make sure that this is disclosed and that the relationship, and they want you to identify whether or not the relationship occurred within the last 12 months, and they also want to know if there is a perceived interest, conflict of interest for yourself, your spouse, or your partner. If you identify that there is or is not, you would need to indicate that on the bottom two boxes of this section? If the answer is yes, you complete the next portion of the form, and we've structured this so that it will be easy for you to identify the category and the description. And remember, the conflict of interest, including potential ones, must be resolved prior to the planning, implementation, or evaluation of the educational activity. Here's an example of a conflict of interest form that's been filled out. So yes, there was a potential or perceived conflict of interest, and it came in the sense that there was a royalty from biotech and that you owned stock in Stryker. Now, having a potential conflict of interest is identified, but what is critical is that it needs to be resolved. So this algorithm, which is based on the ANCC criteria for 2013, is something that we're hoping will be helpful to the nurse planners as they go through and identify conflicts of interest with their planners, presenters, or perhaps even themselves. So the first question is there any type of affiliation or relationship to disclose? If the answer, and again, that's based on the criteria of a conflict, if the answer is no, you're resolved. If the answer is yes, you need to answer the second question, which is the affiliation or relationship related to the content of the educational activity? If the answer is no, again, there's no conflict of interest. If the answer is yes, the conflict of interest needs to be disclosed to the participants, and the resolution will need to be required. So what are some of the conflict of interest resolutions? The procedures used to resolve the conflict of interest or potential bias, if applicable for this activity, would be not applicable, so no conflict of interest exists. So simply because you have stock in a company does not mean that there is a conflict, and if you have no relationship to the content, it's not applicable and you can move on. The second box says, I've discussed the identified conflict with the nurse planner, and I agree to suggestions for resolving any conflict prior to the CNE event. That could include, I own stock in Stryker. I'm not going to do anything during my presentation that would pose a potential conflict or bias. I won't use the Stryker name during my presentation. I won't include any logos on PowerPoint presentations or slide presentations. That would be an example of how to resolve the conflict. Or you could check, I recognize that if I'm unable to resolve, I will not be a planner, presenter, author, or reviewer for the CNE activity or other. And we'll give some examples of that. Also included on this slide, and I don't want to minimize, and I want to make sure we go back to the conflict resolution, but there is a section here that presenters can complete to make sure that to identify how they would like to be introduced to the audience. And this section can or cannot be completed depending on whether or not the presenter chooses to do that. It's not a required section. Back to the conflict resolution. In this section, they recognize that they are, if they are unable, they will not be the planner, but they also identify an other, that there is no affiliation or relationship with either biotech or Stryker related to the content. Therefore, there is no conflict of interest and the program can proceed. The statement of understanding in section 7 has an electronic signature for the person, either the planner or the planning committee members, to complete and sign off on. And as you'll see on this section, the nurse planner now must sign every planner and presenter bio form.